Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Arabiya English. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's programme, we're looking ahead to today's summit in Alaska between Presidents Donald Trump and President Vladimir Putin. We ask, what can we expect to emerge from their talks? Should these talks be happening at all? And what if nothing happens and nothing emerges? We'll be putting those questions and more to our panel of guests today. Hello and welcome to the programme. We continue our coverage of the talks in Alaska between President Donald Trump and President Vladimir Putin, the first official meeting between the two men since 2018 when they met in Helsinki. Well, the two presidents are meeting at the Joint Base Elmendorf Richardson to discuss the war in Ukraine. Well, with Ukraine not invited to attend, could this summit help or hurt Ukraine's position? Well, today we're going to be finding out. We'll also be looking ahead at just what to expect from those talks. Well, my guests today are Amanda Mackie, Republican strategist and lawyer. We're also joined by Jim Townsend, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defence for European and NATO policy. Thank you both very much indeed for joining us. Jim, let me start by asking you, what can we realistically expect to be achieved at those talks on Friday between the two presidents?
Well, I think what we can hope for, that I think is in the realm of the possibility, is maybe a 30-day ceasefire. If they can freeze the line of contact in terms of where the troops are, if we can freeze that at where they are today, and we can have a 30-day period where perhaps diplomats and experts can come together and put down on paper what the process could look like, what the issues are, what needs to be done, and work it so that by the time the two leaders get back together again, maybe with Zelensky, there's actually a piece of paper they can work from. Those three shouldn't be the ones negotiating all the details. They need to approve what their staffs have negotiated with each other. And I hope that's what we see, is a ceasefire and 30 days of hard work at the staff level, and then the three leaders getting together over a piece of paper and maybe coming to an agreement.
Amanda, does that roughly match what you would expect to emerge from those talks, what Jim was saying there?
I think, reasonably, we can assume that nothing will happen. I think that's the safer bet here. And that's certainly what President Trump has kind of been putting out there to make sure that people don't have really set high expectations for him. I think today he set it at 25% likelihood that it doesn't happen. And so I think that what people need to understand is that this is a big step, that he even got Putin to talk to him on U.S. soil. Of course, Alaska's unique in that it's closer to Russia than it is to Washington, D.C. But the point is that he's on our soil. They're having a conversation. And President Trump has reiterated, look to the second conversation, not the first.
Okay,
if there is a second.
And what did the U.S. public make of all of this? I mean, do people feel encouraged that these talks are happening at all? There's some people saying they shouldn't be happening. Jim, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think it's a couple things. One is there has been a bit of hype about this. It kind of goes back and forth over the past couple of weeks when the first announcements were made. So there's a lot of attention being paid, particularly in Europe. The president met with over the television screen, I guess. He met with his counterparts in Europe. Vice President Vance also met with his counterparts when he was in the UK. And there have been subsequent phone calls back and forth. And I think the president seemed to think that he had a good discussion with the Europeans. The Europeans came away feeling roughly the same way, that there was closure between the U.S. and Europe on many issues, and they feel like they've been heard. And so there's some expectation.
Okay, looks like we've lost Jim there. Let me cross back to you, Amanda, while we get Jim back up again. Amanda, tell me your thoughts. I mean, is there the feeling in the United States that President Trump has done all the homework, or do people think he's perhaps going to shoot from the hip a little bit here?
Well, to Jim's point, I think that, we would hope that the staff work behind the scenes is what is actually going to go pen to paper when they meet tomorrow. But I don't believe that that's the case because I think President Trump likes to get his adversaries, in which case Putin certainly is an adversary to be considered here, to get them to the negotiating table and to feel them out. I think he really wants to see the body language and see what Putin can do if he's going to do anything at all. I think a lot of Americans, to your point about the question you asked, how do Americans feel about this? I think people are very worried that Putin isn't going to do anything because he has moved the goalpost all along throughout since February 2022. I'm sorry, 2021. This has been going on. So to the average American person, they're just wondering, will anything even come out of this? And again, I think that's why you're seeing President Trump level set expectations. Look to the second meeting, not the first, because he doesn't want Americans to get their hopes up. Of course, we want to see an end to the war. No one wants to see conflict. But as I've said on your show multiple times, this is not our war to fight. And President Trump made that clear on the campaign trail. He's made that clear all along. But President Trump is also showing his softer side where he doesn't want to see a continuation of death after death in Ukraine and in Russia.
Okay, Jim, let me bring you back into the conversation. I mean, President Trump has sort of, as we've been saying, he's been setting expectations pretty low, managing them downwards, I think it's fair to say, ahead of these talks in Alaska. One of the other things he's said is he's talked about territorial exchanges. But I mean, from where I sit, I'm not seeing this being a two-way exchange. I mean, it's going to be a one-way exchange, isn't it?
Well, it certainly looks that way. I think that's been a lot of the questions in people's minds about what was meant by land swaps. That sounds like something, in the real estate world. I'm not so sure that makes much sense in the world that we're talking about here. But again, over the past few weeks, there's been a lot of rhetoric one way or another. He has downplayed things, as my colleague said. He has walked back things. And then things become, I think he has said something just over the past hour or two that was optimistic. I think he said that he thinks Putin will make a deal. So, we don't really know. And so I think that I think going back to your question, though, I don't think we're going to see decisions like land swaps mentioned. My colleague said, President Trump said, look to the second meeting. I agree. Look to the second meeting once we've had experts meet and talk about what does a land swap look like? What could people live with? What is off the table? This first meeting, and they're going to be feeling each other out in terms of where they stand on various issues. And if they can then set in motion a process that gets into those details, that defines a bit more what a land swap means, then they can have a second meeting that'll be more substantive. But I think that we're not going to hear those kinds of details about land swaps at the press conference on Friday.
Yeah, I mean, we don't think the two men have met since about 7 years ago, 2018, I think it was, in Helsinki. That's what I'm being told. I mean, Amanda, what's your thinking? Do you think President Trump and people in his party on the whole hold President Putin in high regard? And what do you think the chemistry is like between the two men?
Well, I think it's going to be icy. I don't think that there's going to be a friendly exchange. And certainly, Putin has really upset the president, and the president has said that, and he has said he will impose sanctions, and he has said that he will make it very difficult for the Russian people. And their economy is suffering. And that's probably why Putin's even coming to the table. But Putin sees what President Trump is doing to all these other countries, and he knows that he's not going to be immune from it. And so he's coming to the table. Who knows if it's in good faith? I think that's the biggest question that we have to ask. Is he going to do something in good faith? I mean, let's be honest. They had a conversation, President Trump and Putin did, and he bombed the hell out of Ukraine that same night. So is this a person who is really going to want to negotiate in good faith, or is he just doing it for the theatrics of it?
Sure, Amanda, but I mean, let me put this to Jim. As we've been saying, President Putin feeling the heat from sanctions, the Russian economy, a couple of indicators looking pretty alarming from where he sits. But he does have the upper hand on the battlefield, doesn't he, Jim?
Well, he does, and the belief is that he feels that given time, he's going to win on the battlefield. Ukraine fights hard, but you know they've got manpower issues, and there's other things that can grind Ukraine down, and perhaps give a break to the Russian forces, who might be able to make advances and really put Putin in a better place. So there's that. You know, the economic downturn, certainly for Russia at home, that we've heard about. My feeling is that maybe in our societies, if we'd had some downturns the way that Russia's having them now, there would be problems and marches in the streets. But in Russia, I don't think a bad economy necessarily translates into problems for Putin. He doesn't have to worry about running for re-election. And he doesn't see things the way we do. But there is one thing that he is getting some pressure from, and that is the potential of energy shortages for him in terms of his oil exports and the money he earns from the oil exports. If the president, in fact, puts secondary tariffs on India or other countries that buy his oil, that's going to cut probably his exports, and that will cut the amount of money he has coming in to fund the war. And of course, Zelensky is bombing every night. He's bombing refineries in Russia. So the Russian ability to refine oil into gasoline for cars in Moscow, as well as on the battlefield, that's going to be hurt too. And then, of course, the EU has put sanctions on his shadow fleet, the tankers that are being used in the exportation of fuel. Now they're under sanctions by the EU. So he is feeling pressure on the energy side, because if he doesn't have gasoline for people in Moscow, he might hear something from his domestic audience then. But he's not going to have the money that comes in from exports that helps him pay for the war, and he'll have shortages on the battlefield. So that might be something that will pressure him to actually come to the table to get some relief.
Okay, let's talk about President Zelensky for a moment, because it's been 6 months since that infamous meeting in the Oval Office between President Trump and President Zelensky, when Zelensky was effectively shooed out of the building. President Trump pretty hard on Zelensky, certainly in the first few months he was in office and on the campaign trail, as were quite a number of people in the GOP. Amanda, do you think he's softened his stance towards President Zelensky? Do you think President Trump and President Zelensky are now more or less on the same page?
Well, I think he kind of pulled a Machiavellian move on him. You know, he kind of showed him the door, as you said, shoot him out of the White House, really made an embarrassment of him in February when he was in Washington at the White House. But what President Trump wants, I think the overarching theme here is that he wants to broker peace. This is what he wants to partially build his legacy on. I think the fact that you see him doing a call with all these European leaders yesterday, it's just really dynamic. It's very interesting to see. He is trying to lead them all in hopes that he can broker this negotiation. And again, level setting expectations. But, I will say one thing. In the United States, they go after President Trump, the naysayers, the haters, they call him vitriolic words. You've heard it all. They've, called him Hitler. They've called him all these things. And I think it's really interesting, all these bombastic things that they have called him. And yet he's the one who's trying to save Europe from Putin invading and continuing to invade. So what President Trump is trying to do partially is, I think, to build a legacy, to demonstrate himself as a leader. So it doesn't matter whether he likes Zelensky or not. He may not care about the guy at all, but he pulled a Machiavellian move with what he did. And now he's just trying to save people from dying and Putin from just invading wherever he'd like to invade.
Okay, Jim, as we're sort of approaching the end of this discussion, I'd like to ask you, what happens if the talks fail, nothing comes out of this, that's the end of the diplomatic process? What does President Trump do then?
Well, I think he comes back to Washington, and either he is very frustrated and really says, "I'm going to really have to press Putin now. I'm going to put some sanctions on him, not just on the energy side, like the secondary tariffs, but I'm also going to hit his banking sector harder than we've done in the past. I'm going to really push him." He could do that if he feels that might have an impact. He also could come back to Washington and go, "Look, I have tried." And I have been tapped along, and this is again we have not reached the stage I thought we would. This isn't working,
Okay.
and I've got other things to do. And so he would then say, "I'm going to have to move on to other things. I'm going to leave this to Europe to deal with."
All right, Amanda, which of those two scenarios sounds more likely to you in 20 seconds, if you will?
I would just say that President Trump's going to do everything that he can. You know, if he has to impose sanctions, he will. He's going to do everything that he has promised and committed to. But again, when he campaigned, he did not say that this was his job to do. It was not our role to fight this war, but he's certainly going to do everything he can to end it.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you both very much indeed. Amanda Mackie, Republican strategist and lawyer, you've had the last word. Thanks to you, Jim Townsend, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for European and NATO policy. Thank you very much indeed to you as well.
Thank you.
That is all we have time for on this special edition of Global News Today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again on Monday for more exclusive interviews. Until then, bye-bye.